efforts to cut the federal workforce might not be described as surgical, a mass email demanding accountability.
There was a lot of genius in sending it. If people don't respond, it's very possible that there is no such person or they're not working.
A lot of the focus on the first cuts targeted teleworkers.
It is very much a made-up problem that federal workers aren't coming to work. That's nonsense.
This week, we look at the numbers and the potential downside of downsizing.
It will be an absolute disaster in this country.
Ocean City, Maryland is an old-school American beach town.
Ocean City is beach, boardwalk, fun, sun.
Plans for an offshore wind farm have support from the state, but not from the locals. And maybe more importantly, not from the president.
Do you believe that it's the Republicans' plan and goal to end offshore wind development, not only in Maryland, but in the country?
But the whole cholesterol theory is really bogus.
And a conversation with a doctor about a new approach to medicine and who controls the science.
Pharma for sure. I mean, evidence-based medicine was the means by which they then took over medicine.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. When President Trump took office for a second term, there were about 2.3 million civilian federal employees, about the size of the population of New Mexico. Never before have they, as a group, been so shaken up. Under the direction of the Department of Government Efficiency, they've been told the party's over. But some insist there was never a party to begin with, and the downsizing will have disastrous results. Today's cover story is back to work. Monday, February 24th, could be marked down as D-Day in the Trump administration's efforts to drastically downsize and upgrade the federal workforce. Starting this week, those who still fail to return to office will be placed on administrative leave, warned Elon Musk. Musk leads the Trump-created Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. 4 days earlier, there was Musk waving a chainsaw at a conservative conference, symbolizing the slashing of government jobs, spending, and bureaucracy. Meantime, the clock was ticking on another February 24th deadline for federal employees to email 5 bullet points telling what they'd accomplished the prior week. Those who do not take this email seriously will soon be furthering their career elsewhere, wrote Musk on X, with President Trump speaking to it later that day.
I thought it was great. There was a lot of genius in sending it. If people don't respond, it's very possible that there is no such person or they're not working.
Fund our schools! Fund our schools!
The moves to downsize the federal workforce are sparking protests and court challenges, and drawing ire from Randy Irwin, who heads up the National Federation of Federal Employees, a union representing 110,000 workers.
How big should our government be? How much should we be spending on these services? There's nothing wrong with that. But, for the folks that want less government, less spending, lower taxes also, right? It turns into just a criticism of federal employees no matter what. They will not say anything good about federal workers no matter how good a service they provide to people or at good value. And so, any little thing that they can harp onto that makes federal employees seem lazy or what have you, those stories have legs. And so people get the wrong idea.
The dedication of some in the federal workforce has long been called into question. Critics say teleworking has been used by too many as a chance to slack off on the taxpayer dime. The Government Accountability Office, or GAO, recently analyzed telework at 4 agencies and found it's increasingly been offered as a perk. GAO's Dawn Locke.
One thing in particular that was interesting to me is how telework is being used as a currency. So, for example, at Citizenship and Immigration Services, we saw that 3 times more applicants applied for positions that had at-home options versus those that were in the office.
She says some agencies need to do better at measuring whatever constitutes success.
In particular, they have to evaluate their telework programs to ensure that those programs allow them to efficiently and effectively meet the needs of their mission goals, as well as the needs of the American public.
For critics of telework, an investigation by Senator Joni Ernst, who leads the Senate DOJ caucus, produced eyebrow-raising results. Of 6,338 people who said they were federal employees, only 6% said they report in person on a full-time basis, and nearly a third of the government workforce was entirely remote. The stats were bolstered by an Inspector General report last October. It found that at the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, 95% of 6,800 employees were either teleworking, working remotely, or were entirely mobile. Most required to report to the office just twice in 2 weeks. Irwin challenges those numbers.
So it is very much a made-up problem that federal workers aren't coming to work. That's nonsense.
He points to a Biden administration report from last August. The Office of Management and Budget said about 46% of the federal civilian workforce, or 1.1 million, worked out of the office at least some. 10% of those were fully remote, but the majority, 1.2 million or 54%, worked fully on site. I think all of us know people who can be effective working at home, and we all probably know people who couldn't be.
Right.
And we wonder how the federal government discriminates or figures out, are they getting the best and the most of a worker who's not coming into the office regularly?
Absolutely. The American taxpayer deserve to get the services that they're paying for. But again, when they put out statistics like only 6% of the federal workforce is coming to work, it seems like, virtually nobody's coming to work. But 81% of federal work days are spent in the office overall, 81%. So really, those who are not effective at telework have come back into the office, by and large. For those who are more efficient at telework, they're continuing to telework.
Besides the crackdown on telework, the Trump administration nearly shuttered the doors of the U.S. Agency for International Development. With an annual budget of about $50 billion and more than 10,000 employees, 9,000 were put on notice. Government-wide, the Trump administration fired 200,000 probationary employees and got 75,000 more to accept a deal to resign. 75,000 government employees have taken advantage of an offer, sort of a buyout to leave their jobs and get an 8-month paid vacation. What are your thoughts about this whole process?
It's terrible for our country. It was, in our view, a bad deal for federal employees. Our recommendation was, people got to decide for themselves, but our recommendation is don't accept it.
While President Trump is making waves today, numerous administrations have taken on the popular mantle of targeting workers and waste. In 1993, President Bill Clinton and Vice President Al Gore rolled out pallets of government regulations for impact.
Our goal is to make the entire federal government both less expensive and more efficient. We'll conduct an intensive national review of every single government agency and service.
The Clinton administration ultimately cut the federal workforce by over 377,000 and targeted the establishment bureaucracy, sounding something like Trump and Musk more than 30 years later.
The report contains hundreds of suggestions just like that one, totaling $108 billion in savings over the next 5 years if these recommendations are enacted. It is inspired by your vision of a government that works for people, cleared of useless bureaucracy and freed of red tape and senseless rules.
As far as what American taxpayers are saving so far through personnel cuts, current estimates say the federal workforce has been shrunk by at least 12%, with $30 to $40 billion in savings so far per year. What do you foresee in the next 4 or even 10 years as a result of what's going to happen in the next 4 years if government is significantly downsized, as this administration says it intends to do?
It will be an absolute disaster in this country. It really will be.
Downsizing government continues to be popular with taxpayers. But the fact remains that in Washington, D.C., spending money creates friends and political donors. Cutting is bound to make enemies, which is why politicians usually find it much easier to add to the budget than subtract. The Trump administration moves are the subject of multiple legal challenges. By the way, after Elon Musk bought Twitter, now X, he reportedly slashed 6,000 jobs, or 80% of the original workforce, within 6 months, with many wrongly predicting that would be the end of the platform. Ahead on Full Measure, throwing good taxpayer money after bad on green energy? With a month left in office, the Biden administration approved its 11th commercial-scale offshore wind energy project. That's despite technical problems and big financial hurdles for many projects already started. Now, the Trump administration has not only stopped new leases, but it's promising to review those already granted. Mackenzie Frost reports from Maryland, the Democrat-run state that's doubling down on its offshore wind plans, despite all the problems and significant local opposition.
As Ocean City emerges from a blustery winter, Maryland's biggest beach town prepares to welcome an expected 8 million visitors who will generate hundreds of millions of dollars for the state economy. But the prospect of one new business on this horizon is sparking spirited opposition. Kevin Gibbs has been here all his life. He and his family own 3 restaurants and a hotel.
Ocean City is beach, boardwalk, fun, sun.
But he says the beach town is turning up the heat as debate continues over Maryland's controversial plans for a giant offshore wind farm with up to 114 900-foot turbines positioned just 11 miles offshore.
Do you feel like you were lied to in the process of this?
Lied strong, but yeah, it was, 22 miles offshore, 30 miles offshore. Don't worry about it. You won't see it. The funnest thing was always hold your thumb up. It's only going to be the size of your nail. And then before you know it, they were 11 miles offshore.
People here say they support green initiatives. They want to help the environment. This city thrives on the outdoors. But the plan that they believe they were sold on this offshore wind is not the one they're getting now.
President Donald Trump is blowing new wind in the sails of wind farm opponents. In January, he signed an executive order halting new offshore wind permits and ordering a review of current projects, like the one in Maryland. Andy Harris is the state's only Republican congressman. He's against Maryland's offshore wind plan.
You said you looked forward to working with incoming President Trump to end all offshore wind development in the future. Have you had any conversations with the president about that now that he's in office?
We've had conversations with his staff, with his team. There's no question about it. He thinks that offshore wind is a waste of money.
Do you believe that it's the Republicans' plan and goal to end offshore wind development, not only in Maryland, but in the country?
The fact of the matter is we can't afford a energy production methodology that costs 4 times as much as natural gas energy development.
As reality has kicked in, enthusiasm over wind is dying down. At least 10 offshore wind projects in the United States have been canceled or stalled in recent years, hit by soaring costs, supply chain issues, and state regulations. And projects already built have suffered failures.
Another chunk of a wind turbine blade falling into the ocean off Nantucket.
Last summer, a turbine blade shattered off the Massachusetts coast, closing some beaches.
They had weeks of cleaning up styrofoam and pieces of plastic and fiberglass and pieces of that wind turbine blade from that beach. It was a major impact on the economy.
A Vineyard wind turbine, which broke apart over the summer, has apparently been damaged again. This time.
And in early March of this year, lightning zapped the same troubled turbine. But despite turbulence in the industry, Maryland is pursuing an aggressive renewable energy plan. Governor Wes Moore promising to accelerate the state's move away from fossil fuels. C.T. Wilson, a Democrat state delegate, is a big supporter of the plans.
We need to do something now because we are a net importer of energy, and we can change that. It's time to start, putting our mind towards renewables.
A lot of people in the region where this would be built don't want this.
Nobody ever seems to want anything in their backyard. They want the energy from it and the benefit, but they don't want it in their backyard. So we're working with that right now.
Through subsidies and investments, Maryland has already committed roughly $350 million to wind energy in the last few years. But now, facing budget problems, there are questions about what pledges the state's leaders might have to scale back. In Ocean City, leaders are hoping the tide has turned on offshore wind.
I think you can see in comparison the true height of these structures.
Mayor Rick Meehan is against the wind farm, and he thinks the Trump administration's review of existing projects could mean this one gets stopped.
We're cautiously optimistic that the review process will reveal the concerns that we have expressed throughout the last almost 8 years now. And so we think the momentum is actually shifting.
Who's been ignoring what you've had to say about this?
The state, the Public Service Commission, the governor.
Meehan says at least one project contractor has been generating offers to Ocean City and other beach towns. This email from U.S. Wind outlines what the company calls an offer of a community benefits agreement of unspecified benefits to not oppose the project.
My response was very direct. It was Ocean City is not for sale.
Ocean City is among those suing and hoping to force change in direction. For now, the state continues to put momentum and taxpayer money behind wind despite the turbulence.
You mentioned that Maryland's having budget problems
Yes.
that could impact its plans.
Absolutely. Maryland is facing a $3.3 billion budget deficit right now, and lawmakers have until April 7th to get that figured out. There's a lot of reasons why we're facing this deficit in the state, but a lot of lawmakers are saying it's time for the state to pull back some of the support for projects like this offshore wind project in Ocean City, especially without the federal support of this new administration.
Fascinating story. Thank you. Welcome to the Full Measure
Thank
team,
you.
Mackenzie.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And coming up, the next wave is brave. Since the disastrous handling of COVID, there's a growing movement among medical professionals to champion what they're calling medical freedom. They include Dr. Richard Ammerling, who was canceled from his teaching job as a professor for refusing the COVID vaccine. He's co-author of The Next Wave is Brave, Standing Up for Medical Freedom. When you talk about how medicine changed, what do you think drove that and is driving that?
Pharma, for sure. I mean, evidence-based medicine was the means by which they then took over medicine, because it created a hierarchy of evidence. So the randomized controlled trial was up at the top, and anything under that was suspect, right? And what was particularly suspect were physicians' actual experience, which is absurd because that's the basis of medical practice. So that enabled them to create these guideline panels. They would do a review of the evidence by an outside group, by the way. It wasn't the doctors themselves poring over journals. No, they had pre-selected literature that they would review and then come up with recommendations for various clinical problems. And invariably, they ended up recommending these treatments, the pharmaceutical treatments, the people that organized the panels. And the panelists were paid by industry in various ways, either as researchers, consultants, or speakers.
So I think what you're saying, and if I'm picking it up right, is the whole notion of evidence-based medicine, which is what we hear about all the time. Everything has to be evidence-based medicine. This may be sort of a strategy on the part of pharmaceutical interests or other interests that are making money.
Sure, or totalitarians. I mean, it's a perfect vehicle to control people, because whoever is controlling the evidence, they control the dialogue and the strategies. So pharma, we know, controls what articles get published. They're the ones that produce these randomized controlled trials. They actually hire people to write them, and then they pay various academics to put their name on the paper. And the medical literature upon which the guidelines are based is corrupt. So they come up with the same answers all the time, more and more drugs.
Can you give us an example, a real-life example of guidelines that were established that steer us to medicine and drugs when maybe there's a better path?
Sure, statins, that is an entire scam. But the whole cholesterol theory is really bogus. Cholesterol does not cause heart disease. I talk about how we go away from real science, and we're just looking at studies which they call evidence. The studies just look at a population. That population study doesn't prove that the drug works, right? Even if slightly more people get a good response, well, what about the ones that didn't, right? It didn't work and everybody did it, and of course it never does, right? So these studies cannot be the basis for treatment recommendations, yet that's what they do.
So if you could summarize it, most people and even doctors think evidence-based medicine means what, and what does it mean to you?
Well, it sounds scientific, right? It sounds, oh, evidence-based, of course we have to be evidence-based. Well, what is evidence? Evidence is just something that is used in a scientific process. It is not science. And the whole evidence-based medicine movement is pseudoscience. It is arbitrary scheme to prioritize a certain type of evidence. And there is no justification for it whatsoever.
And prioritize the evidence that directs people toward expensive treatments? Is that what you're saying?
It's become to the point, not only are you directed to pharmaceutical treatments, but you are at risk if you don't follow them. And this is one of the things that I was pointing out in my lectures way back when, that once you create this guideline, it becomes a standard, and you can't control it. It goes outside the medical profession. So now standard of care has now become standardized care, which means one size fits all. Everybody gets the same process, same thing. That's how they justify the vaccination policies.
I interviewed Dr. Ammerling at the Back to Basics Conference Summit on Family, Food, and Healthcare. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, today's men are quite literally not the men their fathers used to be. It's a shocking national health crisis that's largely gone undeclared and unexplained.
It's hugely prevalent, affects about 1 out of 3 adult men over the age of 40. And not only does it cause symptoms that make the men not feel so good, but it's associated with important health issues.
The doomsday scenario regarding mysteriously declining testosterone levels in the American male. We'll see you next week on the next Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. Thanks for watching.